On the fringes of the Viridian Quadrant, the Jarak alien empire reigned supreme. Their biotech dreadnoughts and graviton cannons had subjugated countless star systems. Zereth Prime, their capital world, boasted opulent spires that pierced the stratosphere and force fields that shimmered like liquid diamond in the light of its 3 suns. Lieutenant Mara Quinn stood motionless on the transport ship's rampart, her weathered hands clasped behind her back, her green eyes reflecting nothing of the humiliation unfolding before her. The grand triumphal parade stretched across Zereth Prime's central plaza, where the Jarak Emperor had arranged a public display of captured human artifacts, wooden plows, scythe blades, and ox-drawn harrows, presented as primitive curiosities for the amusement of the Empire's elite. "Behold!" bellowed the Imperial Herald, his voice amplified through crystal resonators that made the air vibrate. "The primitive implements of our newest subjects. While we command the power of stars, these Earth-dwellers still scrape dirt with sticks." Laughter rippled through the assembled Jarak nobles, their iridescent scales flashing in synchronized amusement. Their elongated limbs gestured mockingly at the farming tools displayed on anti-gravity pedestals. Mara's expression remained impassive, though a muscle twitched in her jaw. Only she knew the truth. These primitive tools were anything but. Each was a carefully crafted weapon, forged from adaptive smart alloy and concealing pressure wave generators that could slice through battle-grade armor like it was gossamer. The wooden handles contained compressed deuterium cores, and what appeared to be simple metal joints were actually quantum-locked trigger mechanisms. As the Jarak continued their mockery, Mara glanced at her chronometer. 2 more planetary rotations until deployment. She allowed herself a slight smile. The Jarak Empire had dominated the galaxy's eastern spiral arm for 3 centuries. Their bioengineers had perfected the art of growing living starships from seed crystals harvested from gas giants. Their generals commanded armies that moved like single organisms, linked through neural interfaces and guided by tactical computers that could predict enemy movements before they were even conceived. In the Empire's data archives, humans were classified as agrarian brutes, a species barely worth subjugating, whose primary value lay in their potential as labor fodder or, at best, entertainment. Imperial scholars produced elaborate treatises on humanity's evolutionary stagnation, citing their continued reliance on soil cultivation and plant harvesting as evidence of intellectual limitation. "Their ships still burn chemical fuels," sneered High Commander Vrex during a strategic briefing that Mara had once infiltrated. "And their weapons? Merely refined versions of the same projectile launchers they've used for millennia. They have no understanding of graviton manipulation or neural computation." The assembled officers had clicked their mandibles in agreement, their compound eyes glittering with contempt. What the Jarak failed to understand was that humanity's apparent technological simplicity masked ingenious adaptability. Humans didn't replace tools, they improved them, modified them, repurposed them. Where the Jarak saw primitive implements, humans saw foundations for innovation. Mara Quinn embodied this philosophy. Born on New Eden, one of Earth's failed agricultural colonies where the soil proved too alkaline for traditional crops. She had watched her parents transform necessity into invention. Her mother, a former quantum physicist, had developed hydroponic systems that doubled as water purifiers. Her father, once a military engineer, had modified their solar-powered cultivator to function as a defensive railgun against raider drones that plagued the outer settlements. By age 12, Mara could disassemble and reassemble a tractor engine blindfolded. By 16, she had designed an irrigation system that used sound waves to break down soil minerals into plant-accessible nutrients. When the Engineer Corps recruiters visited New Eden seeking minds capable of unorthodox problem-solving, Mara's application rose to the top of their list. Now, at 32, Lieutenant Quinn stood at the forefront of humanity's most audacious defensive strategy. Operation Harvest Moon, they called it. a plan so outlandish that even some human generals had balked at its conception. But desperate times called for desperate measures, and with the Jarak fleet preparing its final victory bombardment on human-allied frontier worlds, conventional tactics would lead only to extinction. "The Emperor wishes to know if the human understands what she is witnessing," said a melodious voice beside her. Mara turned to find an Imperial translator, his cranial appendages quivering with barely concealed disdain. "Tell His Radiance that I am deeply moved by the honor," Mara replied, choosing her words carefully, "and that humanity looks forward to contributing our humble skills to the greater glory of the Empire." The translator's gill slits flared in what might have been suspicion or amusement. Jarak facial expressions remained largely indecipherable to humans before he glided away to relay her message. Mara returned her gaze to the parade, where dancers now performed around the displayed human artifacts, mimicking exaggerated plowing motions to the delight of the crowd. She thought of her team, strategically positioned throughout the Jarak jump gate network, waiting for her signal. The plan was in motion. There was no turning back. The Jarak war fleet assembled in high orbit above Zereth Prime 3 days later, a collection of bio-organic vessels that resembled massive, armored cetaceans, their hulls pulsing with bioluminescent veins of energy. The flagship, Eternal Dominion, stretched nearly 2 kilometers from bow to stern, its surface dotted with sensory nodes and weapon ports that could discharge enough energy to shatter a small moon. Admiral Krov, Supreme Commander of the Imperial Forces, stood on the command pulpit, his forearms manipulating the neural interface that connected him directly to the ship's consciousness. Through this link, he could feel every vessel in his fleet, sense their readiness, their eagerness for battle. "The jump coordinates are set," Admiral reported his second-in-command. "All vessels report optimal functioning. The human worlds will be in range of our bombardment platforms within 6 standard hours after emergence." Krov's mouth parts clicked in satisfaction. "This will be remembered as the day we finally ended the human annoyance. Prepare for jump sequence." As the fleet accelerated toward the designated jump point, none aboard noticed the scattered debris floating near their exit coordinates, fragments that appeared to be the remnants of destroyed human cargo vessels. Among these drifting pieces were what looked like damaged agricultural equipment, combine harvesters, threshers, and mechanical plows, tumbling slowly in the void. "Jump sequence initiated," announced the navigation officer. Space twisted around the Jarak fleet as the jump drives engaged, folding reality to bridge the vast distance between star systems. For a moment, the vessels existed in a state of quantum uncertainty, neither here nor there, before reality reasserted itself and they emerged at their destination. Admiral Croft was already preparing to issue bombardment commands when the first alarm sounded. "Proximity alert!" shouted the sensor officer, his voice rising in pitch. "Multiple objects approaching at high velocity." "Show me," ordered Croft, his neural link flooding with sudden data streams. The tactical display revealed the debris they had dismissed was now moving with purpose. The agricultural equipment had come alive, unfurling like mechanical flowers to reveal configurations that bore no resemblance to farming tools. Thresher discs spun at supersonic speeds, generating energy fields that sliced through the armor of escort frigates. Combine harvester arms transformed into energy lances that pierced shield generators with surgical precision. "Impossible," whispered Krov, as the first explosions bloomed silently in the vacuum. Aboard one of the harvester drones, Lieutenant Mara Quinn sat in a reinforced command pod, her fingers dancing across tactile interfaces as she coordinated the attack. Her team had deployed over 50 such devices, each disguised as damaged farming equipment, knowing the Jarak would never consider them threats. "Gamma Team, focus on their propulsion systems," she ordered through her comlink. "Beta Team, target their communication arrays. We need to isolate the flagship." The response came as a series of successful target acquisitions. lighting up her display in satisfying green conformations. The Jarak fleet, caught completely unprepared, struggled to mount an effective defense. Their ships were designed for coordinated assaults against conventional forces, not for close-quarters combat against swarms of agile attackers that could reconfigure themselves on the fly. Quinn activated the central manipulator herself, a massive device that had been disguised as a simple plow. As its transformation sequence completed, it revealed its true form, a plasma-fused cutting edge mounted on an articulated arm, capable of generating enough force to penetrate even the reinforced hull of a Jarak dreadnought. "Target locked," she confirmed, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Initiating primary sequence." The weapon surged forward, its edge glowing white-hot as it struck the flagship's hull. For a moment, resistance flared, the Eternal Dominion's defensive fields attempting to repel the attack, but the plow's edge had been specifically designed to match the resonance frequency of Jarak's shield technology. It slipped through the energy barrier and made contact with the actual hull. Metal screamed as the plow carved a deep furrow across the flagship's side, exposing fuel conduits and power relays to the void. Secondary explosions followed as atmospheric pressure blew out compartments and electrical systems shorted. On the flagship's command deck, chaos reigned. Admiral Krov fought to maintain neural connection with his increasingly damaged vessel, while emergency klaxons wailed and support systems failed around him. "These are not farming implements," he roared, his mandibles clicking in fury and fear. "These are weapons of unprecedented design." His second-in-command staggered as the deck lurched beneath them. "The humans, they deceived us. They allowed us to believe—" "Silence!" Croft severed the neural link, wincing as feedback pain lanced through his cranial nodes. "All vessels, defensive formation, Alpha, target those devices and destroy them." But the Jarak ships, accustomed to fighting in perfect coordination, found themselves unable to adapt quickly enough. Each time they concentrated fire on one of the human weapons, others would strike from different vectors. The harvesters moved with a fluidity that belied their apparent crude construction, evading the increasingly desperate counterattacks. Quinn watched the battle unfold on her tactical display with grim satisfaction. Years of being underestimated, of hearing her people dismissed as primitive dirt farmers, crystallized into this moment of vindication. The Jarak had never bothered to understand that human agricultural technology had evolved not just to cultivate crops, but to function in the harshest environments, to withstand extreme conditions, to accomplish maximum results with minimum resources. "All teams, execute Phase 3, she commanded, initiating the final sequence of their attack plan. Throughout the battlefield, the human devices began to emit specific frequency patterns designed to interfere with the bio-neural interfaces that connected Jarak commanders to their ships. The effect was immediate and devastating. Vessels lost coordination, weapons fired at random or not at all. And in some cases, the organic components of the ships began to rebel against their cybernetic controls. Aboard the Eternal Dominion, Admiral Krov watched in horror as his once mighty fleet disintegrated into chaos. Ship after ship fell to the human weapons, their hulls breached, their systems failing. Even those vessels attempting to retreat found their jump drives sabotaged by specialized disruptors hidden among the debris. "This cannot be happening," he muttered, his compound eyes fixed on the tactical display where red indicators multiplied with each passing moment. "These are peasants, dirt worshippers. They wield plows, not weapons." A massive explosion rocked the flagship as another of Quinn's devices breached its power core. Emergency containment fields struggled to compensate, but the damage was too severe. "Admiral," said his second-in-command, voice trembling with an emotion no Jarak warrior should ever express. "Fear. We must surrender. The fleet is lost." Krov's mandibles clicked rapidly in distress as he considered options that no longer existed. Finally, with his ship breaking apart around him, he opened a broad-spectrum channel. "This is Admiral Krov of the Imperial Jarak Fleet," he transmitted, each word burning like acid in his throat. "We request cessation of hostilities." The response came almost immediately, transmitted on the same frequency, the human's voice clear and unwavering. "This is Lieutenant Mara Quinn of Earth's Engineer Corps. Your request is acknowledged. Power down your remaining weapons and prepare to be boarded." There was a pause before Croft responded, his voice now tinged with something approaching respect. "How? How did primitive farming implements defeat the greatest fleet in the galaxy?" Quinn's reply carried the weight of generations of human innovation. "You saw what you expected to see, Admiral. You never questioned why a species that can travel between stars would still use plows and harvesters. The truth is, we never stopped using them because they work. We just made them better, as the remnants of the Jarak fleet surrendered." Quinn's words echoed through communication channels across the quadrant. On dozens of worlds under Imperial control, subjugated species heard the transmission and began to whisper among themselves. If humans with their primitive technology could defeat the mighty Jarak, perhaps the Empire wasn't as invincible as it claimed. On Zereth Prime, the Emperor watched holographic broadcasts of the battle in stunned silence, surrounded by equally shocked counselors. The images showed in excruciating detail how the feared Imperial fleet had been systematically dismantled by devices that, hours earlier, had been objects of ridicule in their triumphant parade. "Your Radiance," ventured the Imperial Science Advisor, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. "I believe we have miscalculated." The Emperor's scales had lost their lustrous sheen, turning a dull gray that reflected his internal turmoil. "How many vessels remain?" 17, Your Radiance, out of 143. Silence fell over the Imperial chamber, broken only by the soft hum of life support systems and the occasional nervous clicking of mandibles. "Open diplomatic channels to the human authorities," the Emperor finally ordered. "We must reassess our position." Within days, representatives from Earth arrived on Zereth Prime, not as supplicants or conquered subjects, but as equals demanding respect. The diplomatic corps included engineers, scientists, and farmers, a deliberate statement about humanity's values and strengths. Mara Quinn, promoted to commander following the battle that would later be known as the Harvest Victory, led the technical delegation. She stood before the Jarak Imperial Council, her uniform adorned with a single emblem, a stylized plow crossed with a sword. "The terms are straightforward," she stated, her voice carrying through the vast chamber. "The Jarak Empire will withdraw from all human-allied worlds. You will provide reparations for damages caused during your campaigns of conquest, and you will acknowledge humanity as an independent power with whom you wish to establish peaceful relations." The Emperor, diminished but still imposing, leaned forward on his crystalline throne. "And if we refuse these terms?" Quinn smiled, not unkindly. "Then we will be forced to demonstrate that what you witnessed was only a fraction of what human ingenuity can accomplish when challenged." The threat needed no elaboration. The memory of their shattered fleet was still raw. The wounded pride of an empire built on technological superiority still bleeding. "We accept your terms," the Emperor declared after conferring briefly with his advisors. "The Jarak Empire acknowledges humanity as equals." The words seemed to physically pain him, but Quinn nodded in acknowledgement. "Then let this be the beginning of a more productive relationship between our peoples." In the months that followed, the galactic balance of power shifted dramatically. The Jarak, forced to abandon their doctrine of inherent superiority, began to study human technology with new respect. Imperial scholars who had once written treatises on human primitiveness now produced volumes analyzing the elegant efficiency of Earth's adaptable designs. Some Jarak even traveled to human agricultural worlds, not as conquerors, but as students, learning how centuries of working with soil and plants had taught humans to maximize results with minimal resources. A philosophy that, when applied to spacecraft and weapons, produced systems of remarkable resilience and effectiveness. Back on Earth's verdant orbital farms that supplied food to the planet below and colonies beyond. Mara Quinn stood in a field of genetically modified wheat that gleamed golden in the artificial sunlight. She ran her hand along the handle of a reconfigured plow rifle, feeling the smooth transition where farming implement became weapon and back again. Young engineers gathered around her, eager to learn from the woman who had helped save humanity from subjugation. They showed her designs for new tools, devices that served peaceful purposes but could transform if needed. "The key is balance," she told them, watching as they made adjustments to their blueprints. "We create to nurture life, to grow food, to build homes. But we never forget that creation also means protection. The same hands that till soil can also defend it." On a nearby workbench lay a prototype labeled with the project name Peace Harvester, a terraforming device designed to accelerate crop growth on marginal worlds, but which could, if necessary, generate defensive shields against orbital bombardment. Quinn smiled as she watched the next generation continue the work that had defined human history since the first stone tools: adaptation, improvement, dual-purpose innovation. The Jarak had finally learned what humanity had always known, that true advancement came not from discarding the old, but from transforming it into something new. As twilight simulation began in the orbital farm, casting long shadows across the cultivated fields, Quinn looked up at the stars visible through the transparent dome. Somewhere out there, former enemies were becoming reluctant partners, learning that dismissing a species based on appearances was the most dangerous mistake of all. She picked up a handful of rich, dark soil, letting it filter through her fingers. "From this, we grow both our food and our future," she murmured to herself. And anyone who mocks the farmer has never understood the harvest. In the growing darkness, the Peace Harvester's components glinted with promise, the next tool in humanity's ancient tradition of turning plowshares into swords when necessary, and back again when the danger passed. Not primitive at all, but the most sophisticated philosophy in the galaxy: creation and protection, growth and defense, inseparably intertwined.